The roar of the rising waters was deafening, as Josephine Davis clung desperately to the branch of an old oak tree. Her soaked calico dress weighing her down like an anchor threatening to drag her into the churning depths below. The spring flood of 1876 had come without warning to Downieville, California, transforming the peaceful North Yuba River into a raging monster that devoured everything in its path. Josephine's fingers were bleeding and numb from hours of holding on. Her honey blonde hair plastered against her face as the rain continued to fall in unforgiving sheets. The once thriving mining town, nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, had seen its share of hardships, but nothing like this devastating deluge that had washed away homes, businesses, and lives in a matter of hours. "Help!" She screamed again, though her voice had grown hoarse and barely carried over the thunderous water. Her family's small homestead, where she'd lived alone since her father's passing 6 months prior, had been one of the first to go. She'd barely escaped with her life, scrambling up the hillside only to be caught by the rising waters, forcing her to take refuge in the tree. As darkness fell, Josephine's hope dimmed with the fading light. Her 22 years of life seemed pitifully short as her strength waned. The branch beneath her creaked ominously, threatening to snap at any moment. Just as her fingers began to slip, she heard it the sound of splashing that wasn't part of the flood's rhythm. Through the curtain of rain, she made out a figure moving toward her, a man on horseback navigating the treacherous waters with determined precision. "Hold on, madam," a deep voice called out. Just a little longer. The rider maneuvered his magnificent chestnut stallion closer to her perch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a dripping wide-brimmed hat, but Josephine could make out keen blue eyes that locked onto hers with unwavering focus. "The branch won't hold much longer," she cried, her voice trembling. The stranger guided his horse directly beneath her tree. "Jump down," he instructed, extending his arms. "I'll catch you." Josephine hesitated, eyeing the raging waters between them. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "Trust me, I won't let you fall." With the branch groaning beneath her, Josephine knew she had no choice. She took a deep breath and let go, plummeting through the air before strong arms caught her, pulling her firmly against a solid chest. "Hold on to me tight," the cowboy commanded as he settled her in front of him on the saddle. Without hesitation, Josephine wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging to him as though he were life itself. The warmth of his body was a stark contrast to her chilled skin. "Name's Levi Zimmerman," he said, turning his horse toward higher ground. "And I reckon we better get moving before this whole hillside washes away." The powerful horse fought against the current, each step a battle against nature's fury. Josephine buried her face against Levi's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat despite the chaos surrounding them. "Josephine Davis," she managed to reply through chattering teeth. "My farm, it's gone." "Don't think about that now, Miss Davis," Levi said, his voice somehow both gentle and commanding. "Right now, we focus on staying alive." As they climbed higher into the foothills, away from the flooded valley, Josephine felt a strange mix of grief and relief wash over her. Everything she had was gone, swept away in the muddy torrent, yet here she was, alive, rescued by a stranger who had risked his own life to save hers. "Why were you out in this?" she asked, raising her voice to be heard over the continuing downpour. Levi's arm tightened around her waist as he guided the horse over a particularly treacherous section of mud. "Was bringing supplies back to my ranch when I saw the waters rising. Figured there might be folks who needed help." A pause. "Glad I was right." After what seemed like hours of slow, careful progress, they crested a ridge, and Josephine saw lights in the distance, a substantial ranch house standing on elevated ground, safe from the flood waters that had consumed the lower valley. "My place," Levi explained. "Not much, but it's dry and there's hot food waiting." As they approached the ranch house, several figures rushed out onto the covered porch, lanterns held high. "Boss," a weathered man called out. "We was about to send out a search party." "No need, Frank," Levi replied, dismounting smoothly before reaching up to help Josephine down. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her as they touched solid ground. "Found someone who needed a hand." An older woman with silver-streaked dark hair rushed forward, wrapping a blanket around Josephine's shoulders. "Lord have mercy, child, you're soaked to the bone. Come inside before you catch your death. This is Mrs. Hattie Simmons, my housekeeper," Levi explained as the woman ushered Josephine toward the house. "She'll fix you up." Josephine glanced back at Levi, suddenly reluctant to leave the man who had saved her life. "Thank you," she said, the simple words wholly inadequate for the enormity of what he'd done. He tipped his hat, water streaming from its brim. "Just doing what needed doing, Miss Davis." Inside, the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Mrs. Simmons guided her directly to it, sitting her in a chair close to the flames. "Let's get you out of these wet things," the older woman said, already working on the buttons of Josephine's ruined dress. "I've got some clothes that might fit you well enough for now." "The town," Josephine said, her voice hollow as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. "Do you know how bad it is?" Mrs. Simmons's face grew somber. "Bad from what we've heard. The dam above town broke with all the rain. Half of Downieville is underwater, they say." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. "My father's store, our home." Now, Mrs. Simmons soothed, patting her hand. "Things can be rebuilt. You're alive, and that's what matters." After changing into borrowed clothes, a simple blue dress that was slightly too large but blissfully dry, Josephine sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee warming her hands. The kitchen was spacious and well-appointed, speaking of prosperity that surprised her. She'd heard of the Zimmerman ranch but knew little about its owner. The door opened, and Levi entered, having changed into dry clothes himself. Without his hat and duster, Josephine could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with strong, even features and those piercing blue eyes that had first caught her attention. His dark hair was cut short, and a neatly trimmed beard framed his jaw. "How are you faring, Miss Davis?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Simmons. "Better, thank you," Josephine replied, suddenly self-conscious under his direct gaze. "I don't know how to repay you for what you did." Levi waved away her words. "No need for repayment. Wouldn't have been right to leave you out there." "Still, you risked your life, your horse too." A small smile touched his lips. "Thunder's seen worse. We both have." Mrs. Simmons placed a bowl of stew in front of Josephine. "Eat now, talk later, you need your strength." The stew was rich and flavorful, and Josephine hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate quickly, aware of Levi watching her from across the table. "You mentioned your father's store," he said after a moment. "Davis. Was your father Jonathan Davis, who ran the general store in town?" Josephine nodded, swallowing a bite of stew. "Yes, he passed last October, pneumonia." "I'm sorry to hear that. He was a good man, fair with his prices, kind to those down on their luck." Levi's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I didn't realize you were running the store alone." "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but it was our livelihood, and now—" Her voice trailed off as the enormity of her loss hit her again. "The waters will recede," Levi said firmly. "And Downieville will rebuild." It's survived fires, claim jumpers, and hard winters. It'll survive this flood, too. His confidence was reassuring, though Josephine couldn't quite share it. Everything she had was gone: the store, her home, even her few precious mementos of her parents. She was utterly alone, with nothing but the borrowed clothes on her back. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," Levi continued, as though reading her thoughts. "I've got plenty of room, and Mrs. Simmons would appreciate the female company." "That's right," the older woman confirmed, patting Josephine's shoulder. "Gets lonely being the only woman among a bunch of cowhands." Josephine blinked back tears at their kindness. "I can't impose. It's not imposing if you're invited," Levi interrupted gently. "Besides, it'll be days before anyone can safely get back into town, maybe weeks before things start getting put right. You need somewhere to stay in the meantime." "I can work," Josephine offered quickly. "I'm good with numbers. I can cook and sew. We'll sort all that out tomorrow, Mrs. Simmons said firmly. "Tonight you rest. You've been through an ordeal." Later that night, lying in a comfortable bed in a guest room that was larger than her entire bedroom back home, Josephine stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain continuing to fall outside. She thought of Levi Zimmerman, of his strong arms pulling her from certain death, of the quiet authority in his voice when he told her to hold on tight. In the midst of losing everything, she had found something: unexpected safety, and perhaps the beginnings of friendship with the mysterious rancher, who had appeared like a miracle when she needed one most. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Josephine's last thoughts were of blue eyes and the solid heartbeat that had anchored her during their perilous journey through the flood. Morning came with startling brightness, the storm having finally passed during the night. Josephine woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't recognize, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. The flood, the rescue, Levi Zimmerman. She dressed quickly in the clothes Mrs. Simmons had provided: a simple skirt and blouse that fit well enough, and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and frying bacon. The kitchen was alive with activity, Mrs. Simmons orchestrating breakfast preparations, while a young boy of perhaps 16 set the large table. "Good morning, Miss Davis," Mrs. Simmons called cheerfully. "Hope you slept well, all things considered." "Better than I expected," Josephine admitted, moving to help the boy with the table. "Please let me assist you." "This here's Tommy," Mrs. Simmons introduced the boy. "Ranch hand in training and my kitchen helper." Tommy nodded shyly. "Morning, madam. The men are already out assessing damage and checking on the herds," Mrs. Simmons explained. "Mr. Zimmerman rode out at first light to see if the road to town is passable yet." A pang of disappointment shot through Josephine at missing Levi, though she quickly suppressed it. "You think there's any chance of reaching Downieville today?" Mrs. Simmons's expression grew serious. "Doubtful, dear." Frank said the bridge over Carter Creek washed out completely, and there were reports of landslides on the main road. It might be several days before anyone can get through safely. Josephine nodded, accepting this news with as much grace as she could muster. "Then I should make myself useful here." "Please tell me what I can do to help." "Well, since you offered," Mrs. Simmons smiled, "I could use a hand with the bread baking. Feeding a dozen ranch hands takes more loaves than you'd believe." The day passed in a flurry of domestic activity that was both familiar and strange to Josephine. Though she'd managed her own household since her mother's death 5 years earlier, the scale of operations at the Zimmerman Ranch was far beyond anything she was accustomed to. Everything was done in quantities that would have fed her small household for a week. By mid-afternoon, as she was helping Mrs. Simmons hang laundry on lines stretched behind the house, the sound of hoofbeats announced riders approaching. Josephine's heart quickened as she recognized Levi's tall figure leading a group of 4 men. His face was grim as he dismounted, and he spoke briefly to Frank, the foreman, before noticing Josephine and changing course to approach her. "Miss Davis," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "I hope you're feeling recovered today." "Much better, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her work-reddened hands and loose strands of hair escaping her hasty bun. "Were you able to see anything of the town?" Levi's expression sobered. "Not Downieville itself. The road's impassable about 3 miles east of here, washed out completely in places, but we met some folks who made it out on the north route. The damage is extensive." "How many?" Josephine couldn't bring herself to finish the question. 7 confirmed dead so far, mostly those who lived closest to the river, Levi said softly. "But many people got to high ground in time. The church and schoolhouse are being used as shelters. 7 dead." The number seemed both terribly high and miraculously low given the ferocity of the flood she had witnessed. "And my store, our home," Levi hesitated. "I don't have specifics, Miss Davis, but most of the buildings along River Street were damaged or destroyed." River Street, where the Davis General Store had stood for 15 years, passed from her father to her. Josephine nodded slowly, fighting back tears. "I understand. Thank you for being honest. Relief efforts are already organizing," Levi continued. "As soon as the roads are clear enough, we'll send supplies from the ranch. Food, blankets, whatever's needed." "That's very generous of you." "It's what neighbors do," he said simply. "The folks of Downieville would do the same for me if our positions were reversed." A man called for Levi from the direction of the barn, and he excused himself with an apologetic nod. Josephine watched him go, struck by the natural authority he carried. Everyone on the ranch seemed to defer to him without question, yet there was no arrogance in his manner. "He's a good man, Mrs. Simmons said, coming to stand beside Josephine. "One of the best I've known." "You've worked for him long?" Josephine asked, curious about the man who had saved her life. "Going on 8 years now," the housekeeper replied, pinning up a sheet. "Came out here after my William passed." Mr. Zimmerman was just getting the ranch established, then worked alongside his men from sunup to sundown, building most of this place with his own hands. "Has he always lived in Downieville?" Mrs. Simmons chuckled. "Oh my, no. He came out from Boston, if you can believe it. His father was some kind of banking man back east. Levi wanted no part of that life, so he headed west with his inheritance and bought this land when nobody thought it would amount to much." "Boston." Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. Levi Zimmerman carried himself like a man born to the saddle, not the son of an Eastern banker. "Shocked me too when I found out," Mrs. Simmons confided. "But he's taken to ranching like he was born to it. Built this into one of the most prosperous spreads in the county." The information gave Josephine a new perspective on her rescuer. She had assumed he was like most men in the area, rough-hewn and practical, with little formal education. But an Eastern upbringing explained his well-modulated speech and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. That evening, dinner was a lively affair, with all the ranch hands gathering in the large dining room. Josephine found herself seated beside Levi at the head of the table, an honor she tried to decline until Mrs. Simmons silenced her protests with a firm look. The conversation flowed around her, much of it centered on the flood damage and recovery plans. Josephine noticed how Levi listened more than he spoke, weighing each man's report and suggestions before offering his own thoughts. "Once the road to town clears, we'll take the wagon with supplies," he decided after hearing from Frank about the conditions to the east. "Blankets, flour, salt pork, whatever we can spare." "Begging your pardon, boss," one of the older ranch hands spoke up, But shouldn't we be focusing on our own losses? That south pasture's underwater, and we lost at least 30 head from what we could count. A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the men, but Levi quieted it with a level gaze. The cattle will be fine, George. We've weathered worse losses, but there are folks in town who have lost everything. His eyes briefly met Josephine's before returning to the table at large. We help our neighbors first. The ranch will recover. Josephine felt a rush of gratitude at his words, recognizing that he had included her in his definition of neighbors, despite barely knowing her. After dinner, when the men had retreated to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Simmons was busy in the kitchen, Josephine found herself alone with Levi on the wide covered porch. The night was clear, stars emerging in a sky washed clean by the storm, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and pine. "Your men respect you greatly," Josephine observed, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Levi smiled slightly. "They're good men, hard workers. I'm fortunate to have them." "Mrs. Simmons told me you're from Boston originally," she ventured. "That must have been quite a change, coming west." He leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the darkened landscape. "Best decision I ever made. Never felt right in the city, wearing suits and discussing financial portfolios with my father's colleagues." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Have you always lived in Downieville?" "Since I was 7, Josephine replied. "My father brought us west after my mother died. He thought the mountain air would be good for me. I was a sickly child." "Seems to have worked," Levi observed. "You're certainly resilient." Josephine laughed softly. "Not sure how resilient I was yesterday, clinging to that tree." "Most people would have been swept away long before I found you," Levi said seriously. "It takes courage to hold on like that." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I didn't have much choice." "There's always a choice," he countered. "Give up or hold on. You chose to hold on." A comfortable silence fell between them again. In the distance, an owl called, its haunting cry echoing across the valley. "What will you do?" Levi asked finally, "when you can return to town?" It was the question Josephine had been asking herself all day. "Rebuild, I suppose, if anything can be salvaged from the store," she sighed. "Though I don't know if I have the means. The spring inventory had just arrived, our largest investment of the year. It's all gone now." "The town will help," Levi said with conviction. "Downieville takes care of its own." "Perhaps." Josephine wasn't as certain. Times had been hard since the best mining claims played out. Many businesses in town were already struggling before the flood. "I may have to sell the property if anyone would even buy it now and move on." "Where would you go?" The question was soft, almost hesitant. Josephine shrugged. "Sacramento, maybe. I have a cousin there. Or San Francisco, though I've never much cared for cities." Levi turned to face her fully. "Don't make any decisions hastily. Wait until we can assess the actual damage. You might find things aren't as bad as you fear." His concern touched her. "You've already done so much for me, Mr. Zimmerman. I can't expect—" "Levi," he interrupted. "Please." "Mr. Zimmerman makes me feel like my father." "Levi," she amended with a small smile. "Then you must call me Josephine." "Josephine," he repeated, and something in the way her name sounded in his deep voice made her pulse quicken. A beautiful name. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Josephine couldn't quite name. Then Levi straightened, clearing his throat. "It's getting late, and tomorrow will be another long day. Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Levi," she replied, watching as he turned and walked into the house, leaving her with conflicted emotions swirling in her chest: gratitude, uncertainty, and something warmer that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. 4 days passed before the road to Downieville was deemed safe enough for travel. During that time, Josephine fell into a routine at the Zimmerman ranch, helping Mrs. Simmons with household duties and gradually learning more about the operation of the sprawling property. She discovered that Levi ran one of the most successful cattle ranches in Nevada County, having expanded from a modest beginning to nearly 5,000 acres of prime grazing land. She also learned more about the man himself, though Levi remained somewhat reserved. He was unfailingly polite, making sure she had everything she needed, but he spent long days working with his men, returning to the house only for meals and to sleep. Still, Josephine found herself watching for him, enjoying their brief conversations and the quiet moments they occasionally shared on the porch in the evenings. On the morning of the 5th day, Levi announced at breakfast that he would be taking a wagon of supplies into Downieville. "The road's still rough," he explained, "but Frank rode it yesterday and says it's passable if we're careful. We'll take food, blankets, and building materials." "I'd like to come with you," Josephine said immediately. Despite the comfort of the ranch, she had been anxious to see the state of her home and business. "Please." Levi studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. I plan to invite you. Just be prepared it may be difficult to see." 2 hours later, they set out with a heavily loaded wagon driven by Levi, with Josephine beside him on the seat and 2 ranch hands, including young Tommy, riding alongside as escorts. The journey was indeed rough, with sections of the road washed away to narrow tracks that barely accommodated the wagon's wheels. Twice, they had to stop to clear fallen trees, and once to rebuild a portion of road that had collapsed entirely. As they approached Downieville, the devastation became increasingly apparent. Debris littered the landscape, splintered wood, household items, even an entire roof deposited improbably in the middle of what had been a meadow. The Yuba River, though receded from its flood height, still ran high and muddy, far beyond its normal banks. When they finally crested the hill that overlooked the town, Josephine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What had been a tidy settlement of wooden buildings along the riverfront was now a scene of chaos. Many structures were simply gone, leaving only foundations. Others listed at precarious angles, undermined by the floodwaters. Mud covered everything, and people moved through the streets like ghosts, carrying salvaged possessions or working to clear debris. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered. Levi's hand covered hers briefly. "I'm sorry, Josephine." They made their way slowly into town, the wagon wheels sinking into mud that was still ankle-deep in places. People stopped their work to watch them pass, faces lighting with hope at the sight of the loaded wagon. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Patterson whom Josephine had known all her life, approached as they pulled up to what remained of the town square. "Zimmerman," he greeted Levi with obvious relief. "Damn glad to see you. And Miss Davis, we feared you might have been taken by the flood." "Mr. Zimmerman rescued me," Josephine explained, accepting the sheriff's help to climb down from the wagon. "How bad is it, Sheriff?" 12 dead now, confirmed, Patterson said grimly. "Still a few folks unaccounted for. As for property damage," he gestured around them, "you can see for yourself." "We've brought supplies," Levi said, already directing Tommy and the other hand to begin unloading. "Food, blankets, tools, whatever you need most." "God bless you," the sheriff said fervently. "The relief committee's set up in the church. It's on high ground, didn't get hit as bad." Josephine's gaze was drawn down what had been Main Street, toward where her store and home had stood. "My father's store," the sheriff's expression told her everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry, Miss Davis. That whole section of River Street is gone. The water undermined the foundations, and when the buildings collapsed, they were carried away." Though she had prepared herself for this news, Hearing it confirmed sent a wave of grief through Josephine. The store had been her family's legacy, the only home she'd known since childhood. "I need to see," she said quietly. "I'll go with you," Levi offered immediately. "Sheriff, my men will get these supplies where they need to go," Patterson nodded. "Much obliged, Zimmerman. Miss Davis, again, I'm sorry for your loss." The walk through town was heart-wrenching. Everywhere Josephine looked, people were working to salvage what they could from mud-filled buildings or clear away debris. Some nodded in greeting as she passed, their faces showing the same shell-shocked expression she suspected was on her own. When they reached River Street, or what had been River Street, Josephine stopped, unable to process what she was seeing. Where a row of sturdy wooden buildings had once stood, there was now only bare earth, scattered debris, and the muddy expanse of the river, which had carved a new channel through what had been the town's commercial heart. "It's all gone," she said, her voice hollow. "Everything." Levi stood beside her, a solid presence that somehow kept her from collapsing under the weight of her loss. "I'm sorry, Josephine." She took a few steps forward, trying to orient herself. "The store was here, I think, and our living quarters were behind and above it." She pointed to an empty space, now indistinguishable from the surrounding mud. "My mother's china cabinet was against that wall. My father's ledgers were kept on a desk by the window." Levi remained silent, allowing her this moment of remembrance. "It seems so foolish now," Josephine continued, "how much importance I placed on things. Inventory and account books," and her voice broke. "But it wasn't just things. It was my history, my parents' legacy. Now there's nothing left to show they were ever here at all." "That's not true," Levi said quietly. "You're here. You carry their legacy in who you are, not in a building or possessions." Josephine looked up at him, struck by the simple wisdom of his words. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying that and for being here." They stood together for a long moment, surveying the destruction in silence. Then Levi gently touched her elbow. "Come. There's nothing more to see here, and you're needed back at the church. Your knowledge of the town and its people will be valuable in organizing relief efforts." He was right, of course. Standing here mourning wouldn't help anyone, herself included. With a last look at the place where her home had been, Josephine turned away. The next few days were a blur of activity. Josephine threw herself into relief work, helping to distribute supplies, organize temporary housing, and keep records of who needed what. The citizens of Downieville rallied remarkably, coming together in a spirit of cooperation that transcended the usual social divisions. Levi and his men were invaluable, bringing fresh supplies daily and helping with the heavy labor of clearing debris and stabilizing damaged buildings. Josephine found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, admiring the quiet authority with which he directed his men and his willingness to work alongside them, often taking on the most difficult or dangerous tasks himself. At night, they returned to the ranch together, too exhausted for much conversation but finding comfort in each other's company. Gradually, a routine emerged, working together during the day, sharing quiet meals in the evening, occasionally discussing plans for the town's recovery on the porch before retiring. It was during one of these evening conversations, nearly 2 weeks after the flood, that Levi brought up the question of Josephine's future. "The Reconstruction Committee met today," he said, leaning against the porch railing as was his habit. "They've drafted plans for rebuilding River Street, moved back from the water and on higher ground. There's a plot designated for a new general store if you're interested." Josephine looked up from the mending in her lap. "Interested, yes. Able is another matter. I had some savings, but not nearly enough to rebuild and restock a store from nothing." Levi hesitated. "There's talk of the bank in Nevada City offering loans for rebuilding. Special terms for flood victims. Loans require collateral, Josephine pointed out, and everything I had is gone. A silence fell between them, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle being brought in for the night. What if you had a partner? Levi asked suddenly. Someone to invest in the rebuilding, Josephine blinked, surprised by the suggestion. A business partner who would want to invest in a venture that was just destroyed by a natural disaster. Someone who believes in Downieville's future, Levi said, his gaze intent. And in you. The implication of his words slowly dawned on her. You want to invest in rebuilding my store. Levi straightened, moving to sit beside her on the porch swing. I've been thinking about diversifying my interests for some time. The ranch is stable, profitable. A general store that serves both the town and surrounding ranches would be a sound investment. Josephine studied his face, trying to read his true motives. This sounds suspiciously like charity, Mr. Zimmerman. A smile tugged at his lips. Back to Mr. Zimmerman, are we? I assure you, Josephine, I rarely make charitable business decisions. The store would need someone to run it, someone who knows the business and the community. That would be you. I would provide the capital for rebuilding and initial inventory. We would share the profits. It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous. Why? She asked bluntly. Why would you do this for me? Levi's expression grew serious. Because in the 2 weeks you've been here, I've seen how capable you are, how resilient. The way you've thrown yourself into helping the town recover, even in the face of your own losses. He paused. You deserve a chance to rebuild what was taken from you. Josephine's heart beat faster at the intensity in his eyes. There was something unspoken in his offer, something beyond business that neither of them was ready to acknowledge directly. I would need to think about it, she said carefully. It's a significant decision. Of course, Levi agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. My offer stands regardless. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Josephine found her thoughts returning to Levi's proposal long after they had said goodnight and she had retired to her room. A business partnership would bind them together for years, perhaps permanently. It would mean staying in Downieville, rebuilding not just the store but her entire life, and it would mean remaining close to Levi Zimmerman, a prospect that both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. The following weeks saw gradual but steady progress in Downieville's recovery. The main roads were cleared of debris, damaged buildings were either repaired or demolished, and plans for reconstruction proceeded with surprising efficiency. The spirit of community that had emerged in the immediate aftermath of the disaster continued, with neighbors helping neighbors regardless of previous social standing or disagreements. Josephine remained at the Zimmerman Ranch, though she spent each day in town working on relief efforts. She had yet to give Levi an answer regarding his business proposal, though she found herself leaning toward acceptance. The alternative, leaving Downieville to start over elsewhere, became less appealing the more she helped with the town's rebirth. It was Mrs. Simmons who finally pushed her toward a decision, cornering her one evening as Josephine helped prepare dinner. Begging your pardon for speaking plainly, the housekeeper said, vigorously kneading bread dough, but are you planning to leave us soon? Josephine looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. I've imposed on your hospitality for far too long already. Nonsense. Mrs. Simmons dismissed the concern with a flour-dusted wave. Your presence has been a blessing, not an imposition. This house hasn't felt so much like a home since. Well, ever, if I'm being honest. That's very kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's truth. The older woman paused in her kneading. And it's not just me who feels that way. The master's been different since you arrived. Josephine focused intently on her potato. Different how? Lighter, Mrs. Simmons said simply. He smiles more, talks more at dinner, even stays in the house more instead of working himself to exhaustion like he used to. She gave Josephine a knowing look. I've worked for Levi Zimmerman for 8 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Heat rose to Josephine's cheeks. Mrs. Simmons, I don't think— You don't have to say anything to me, the housekeeper interrupted gently. But I hope you'll consider carefully before you make any decisions about leaving. That's all I wanted to say. The conversation left Josephine unsettled, forcing her to confront feelings she had been carefully avoiding. Over the past weeks, her gratitude toward Levi had evolved into something deeper, something that made her heart race when he entered a room and left her watching for his return each evening. But was that enough basis for a business partnership that would tie their futures together? And was business truly all he was offering? Her opportunity to find out came the following Sunday, when Levi suggested they ride to a part of his property she hadn't yet seen. It's a special place, he explained as they saddled their horses after church services. Something I'd like to show you. The day was perfect for riding, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Josephine had borrowed riding clothes from Mrs. Simmons, and though she wasn't as accomplished a rider as Levi, she managed well enough on the gentle mare he had selected for her. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills, until Levi led them through a stand of pines and into a hidden meadow that took Josephine's breath away. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of colors: purple lupines, orange poppies, blue forget-me-nots, and a small, clear stream wound through the center of the clearing. In the distance, snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada stood sentinel against the blue sky. It's beautiful, Josephine breathed as Levi helped her dismount. I found this place my first week in California, he said, tying their horses to a tree branch near the stream where they could drink. I was riding the boundaries of what would become my ranch and got a bit lost. When I stumbled upon this meadow, I knew I'd made the right decision coming west. He spread a blanket on the grass and they sat together, looking out over the view. Levi produced a simple picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of wine. I come here when I need to think, he continued, pouring wine into tin cups, or when I need to be reminded of why I chose this life. Do you ever regret it? Josephine asked, accepting the cup he offered. Leaving Boston, I mean, your family's expectations. Levi considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss certain comforts of city life: books, music, conversation about ideas rather than cattle prices. He smiled slightly. But regret? No, I was suffocating there, living a life prescribed by my father rather than one I chose. That took courage, Josephine observed, walking away from everything familiar. Or foolishness, Levi countered with a self-deprecating laugh. My father certainly thought so. He was convinced I'd fail and come crawling back within a year. But you didn't. No. His expression grew distant. I was determined to prove him wrong at first. Then, after a while, it stopped being about him and became about building something I could be proud of. He glanced at her. What about you? If things had been different, if the flood hadn't happened, would you have stayed in Downieville forever? It was a question Josephine hadn't considered before. I don't know, she admitted. I always assumed I would, but more from inertia than choice. The store was my responsibility after my father died. I never really considered alternatives. And now? Josephine took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. Now everything feels possible in a strange way, terrifying but possible, like I've been given a clean slate whether I wanted one or not. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful surroundings and each other's company. Josephine found herself studying Levi when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, The way the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the capable hands that could gentle a nervous horse or lift a fallen beam with equal skill. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said finally, "the business partnership." Levi set down his cup, giving her his full attention. "And I'm inclined to accept," Josephine said carefully, "but I need to understand exactly what you're proposing, a strictly business arrangement. Or something else." The directness of her question seemed to surprise him, but after a moment, a slow smile spread across his face. "Josephine Davis, you are not a woman who minces words." "Life's too short for that," she replied, thinking of how quickly everything she had could be swept away. "I need to know where I stand." Levi moved closer to her on the blanket, close enough that she could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. "When I pulled you from that flood, I was simply doing what anyone would do, helping someone in need. I had no expectations beyond that." He paused. "But these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness and determination, I find myself hoping for something far beyond a business partnership." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. "What exactly are you hoping for, Levi?" Instead of answering with words, he reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I'm hoping," he said softly, "that you might consider building a life here, not just in Downieville, but with me. At the ranch, as my wife." Though she had suspected his feelings were moving in this direction, the actual proposal left Josephine momentarily speechless. "Your wife," she finally managed. "Levi, we've known each other barely a month." "I know," he acknowledged. "And if you need more time, I understand. But I also know what I feel, Josephine. I've never met anyone like you, someone who matches me in determination, who challenges me, who makes me want to be better than I am." "You hardly know me," she protested weakly, even as her heart soared at his words. "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're brave and resilient. I know your kind. I've seen how you treat everyone from the sheriff to the poorest miner's widow with equal respect. I know you're intelligent and capable of running a business successfully." His voice softened. "And I know that when I'm with you, I feel more at home than I ever have in my life." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "I don't want your pity, Levi. I don't want you to feel obligated because you rescued me." "Pity?" He looked genuinely shocked. "Is that what you think this is?" "What else am I to think? I've lost everything. I have nothing to offer you." Levi took her hands in his expression intense. "You have everything to offer me, Josephine, everything that matters. And if you're concerned about appearances or propriety, we can wait. I'm not proposing we marry tomorrow. Get to know me better, let me court you properly. All I'm asking is that you consider the possibility of a future together." Josephine looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. She couldn't deny her growing feelings for Levi, nor the sense of belonging she'd found at his ranch. But marriage was a monumental decision, especially to a man she'd known such a short time. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." "Of course," Levi agreed immediately, though she could see disappointment flicker briefly in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change." He released her hands and moved slightly away, giving her space. The rest of their picnic passed pleasantly enough, though with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Levi, true to his word, didn't press her further, instead pointing out landmarks visible from their vantage point and telling stories about his early days on the ranch. As they rode back in the late afternoon, Josephine found herself watching Levi with new eyes, trying to imagine what a life with him might be like. Would she be happy as a rancher's wife? Would the initial attraction they felt for each other deepen into lasting love? And what of her own dreams and ambitions? That night, unable to sleep, Josephine slipped out onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. The sky was a blanket of stars, more visible here away from town than they had ever been in Downieville. Couldn't sleep. Levi's voice startled her. He emerged from the shadows at the far end of the porch, a cup of something steaming in his hand. "Too much on my mind," Josephine admitted. "You couldn't either, it seems." "Occupational hazard of ranching," he said with a slight smile. "Always something to worry about, whether cattle prices, predators." He offered her his cup, and she took a sip, finding it to be hot chocolate rather than coffee as she'd expected. The sweet, rich flavor was comforting. "I apologize if I made you uncomfortable today," Levi said after a moment. "That wasn't my intention." "You didn't," Josephine assured him. "Your honesty is refreshing. I just need to be certain of my own mind before I give you an answer." Levi nodded. "I understand, and I meant what I said. Take all the time you need." They stood side by side, looking out at the starlit landscape, close but not touching. The silence between them was comfortable despite the unresolved question hanging in the air. "Whatever you decide about us," Levi said finally, "the offer of a business partnership stands on its own. I want you to know that." Josephine turned to look at him, touched by his consideration. "Thank you. That means a great deal to me." As spring turned to summer, Downieville slowly recovered from the devastation of the flood. New buildings rose where old ones had been washed away, though set back farther from the river on more stable ground. The Davis General Store was among them, construction beginning in early June with capital provided by Levi, as he had promised. Josephine continued to live at the Zimmerman ranch, though she spent most days in town overseeing the store's construction and ordering inventory for when they would open. True to his word, Levi courted her with patience and respect, never pressuring her for an answer to his proposal, but making his feelings clear through countless small gestures of care and affection. They attended church together on Sundays, rode out to his hidden meadow for picnics when time allowed, and spent evenings on the porch talking about everything from books they had read to their hopes for the future. Gradually, Josephine found herself falling deeply in love with the quiet, thoughtful rancher who had pulled her from the flood. It was on a warm July evening, as they sat together watching fireflies dance over the fields, that Josephine finally gave him her answer. "I've been thinking," she began, her heart racing with nervous anticipation. Levi turned to her, his expression cautiously hopeful. About us, about your proposal." Josephine took a deep breath. "And I've decided yes. I would be honored to become your wife, Levi Zimmerman." The joy that blazed across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to feel rushed," or Josephine silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips softly to his. It was their first kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent a current of warmth through her entire body. "I'm certain," she whispered as they parted. "I love you, Levi. These past months have shown me what kind of man you are: honorable, kind, hardworking. The kind of man I want to build a life with." Levi's hands came up to frame her face, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you, Josephine Davis, more than I ever thought possible." He kissed her again, more deeply this time, sealing their promise to each other. When they broke apart, both breathless, Levi reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," he admitted with a sheepish smile, "waiting for the right moment." Inside the box was a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Levi explained. "My mother sent it when I wrote to tell her about you." "You wrote to your mother about me?" Josephine asked, surprised. Levi nodded. "After the first week you were here, I knew even then that what I felt for you was different from anything I'd experienced before." He took the ring from its box. "May I?" Josephine extended her left hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you." They were married on a perfect September day, with the aspen trees just beginning to turn gold against the evergreen backdrop of pine and fir. The ceremony was held in Downieville's newly rebuilt church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Simmons wept openly throughout, while Frank and the other ranch hands stood uncomfortably in their Sunday best, hats clutched in calloused hands. Josephine wore a gown of ivory silk that Levi had ordered specially from San Francisco, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding dress, the only item salvaged from the flood, having been stored in a trunk at a friend's house on higher ground. Her bouquet was made of wildflowers from Levi's special meadow, gathered that morning by Mrs. Simmons and arranged with loving care. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the newly completed Davis and Zimmerman General Store, which would have its grand opening the following week. Tables had been set up in the spacious main room, laden with food contributed by every household in town, a testament to the community's affection for the couple who had contributed so much to Downieville's recovery. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Sheriff Patterson called for attention and raised his glass in a toast. "To Levi and Josephine Zimmerman," he proclaimed, "proof that even the worst flood can bring something good in its wake." Cheers and applause filled the room. Levi's arm tightened around Josephine's waist as he bent to whisper in her ear. "Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman?" Josephine looked up at her husband, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. Later that night, as they rode back to their ranch now, Josephine reminded herself she looked out over the moonlit valley, marveling at how much had changed in the space of 5 months. What had begun as the worst day of her life, clinging to a tree branch in a raging flood, had led her to this moment of profound joy and belonging. "What are you thinking about?" Levi asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead us to the best," she replied. "If not for the flood, we might never have met." Levi considered this. "I'd like to think we would have found each other eventually, perhaps at a church social or a town meeting." "Perhaps," Josephine agreed. "But it might have taken much longer for you to notice the shopkeeper's daughter, or for me to see beyond the wealthy rancher to the man beneath." "Well then," Levi said with a smile, "I suppose I should be grateful for that flood, terrible as it was." As they approached the ranch house, ablaze with welcoming lights, Josephine felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any she had known before. This was where she belonged, not because of a building or property, but because of the man beside her and the love they shared. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The Davis and Zimmerman General Store prospered under Josephine's management, becoming a cornerstone of Downieville's business district. Meanwhile, Levi continued to expand the ranch, introducing improved breeding stock and innovative farming methods that increased both the quantity and quality of their cattle. Their first child, a son named Thomas Jonathan Zimmerman, was born exactly 1 year after their wedding day, a strong, healthy baby with Levi's blue eyes and Josephine's determined chin. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Grace, with a head full of dark curls and a smile that could charm the sternest cowhand on the ranch. On the 5th anniversary of the flood that had brought them together, Levi surprised Josephine by taking her to their special meadow for a picnic. They brought the children this time, watching with delight as Thomas, Now 4 chased butterflies through the wildflowers while Elizabeth, at 2, toddled after him on unsteady legs. You ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out? Levi asked as they sat on their familiar blanket, watching their children play. If I hadn't decided to check the lower pastures that day, if you hadn't held on to that tree for so long. Josephine leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor through both good times and difficult ones. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I look at what we've built together, the store, the ranch. Our family and I can only be grateful for whatever Providence put us in the right place at the right time. Levi pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I rode out to those pastures because something told me I needed to, even though there was no logical reason to check them that day. I've always wondered if it was some kind of divine intervention. Perhaps it was, Josephine mused. Or perhaps it was simply that you're the kind of man who follows his instincts, especially when they tell you someone might need help. Either way, Levi said, watching as Thomas helped his little sister pick a wildflower. I thank God every day that I found you in that flood. Josephine turned her face up to his, heart full of the love that had only deepened with the passing years. And I thank God that when you reached for me, you told me to hold on tight. The best advice I ever gave, Levi murmured, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that still made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. Because I haven't let go since. As the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, painting the meadow in hues of gold and amber, the Zimmerman family gathered their belongings and prepared to return home. Thomas rode proudly in front of his father on the saddle, while Elizabeth nestled securely in Josephine's arms. Looking out over the valley that had become her home, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a frightened young woman clinging to a branch in a raging flood to a confident wife, mother, and businesswoman with deep roots in the community. The flood that had once threatened to take everything from her had, in the end, given her more than she could have ever imagined. The waters that had nearly claimed her life had instead carried her to Levi, to love, to a future brighter than any she could have dreamed. And as they rode together toward home, surrounded by the family they had created, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she would hold on tight to this precious life they shared, through whatever storms might come.